Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to the September 1st, 2017 South Coast Air Quality Management District Governing Board meeting. We're going to open this morning's meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance led by the chair. Please repeat after me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any comments by my colleagues here on about the previous 2 months that we've been off here? Haven't seen everybody. I saw Janice Russer the day before yesterday. She snuck into my favorite watering hole.
I did, where I had the pleasure of speaking to the Women in Green Forum, and it was a wonderful opportunity with a great group that is both professional environmentalists and scholars and activists working in collaboration, and I enjoyed spending the morning with them and seeing you and Dr. Parker.
And it was a large turnout, it looked like. Yeah, it was very nice. Any other comments by any of my other colleagues?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to let folks know that, well, actually, Judy Mitchell, which she's not here right now, and I were, Ben, did you make it up to the
Yes.
summer issue seminar? That's right, you were there too. It was back in the middle of July, so I'm sorry, it's a little hard to remember. But I went to the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance's summer's issue seminar, along with many of our staff, some other board members, and I participated on a couple of panels, one on air quality sensors and the other on indirect source rules. And yeah, each year I go, I find it a very rewarding and educational experience. Also, last week I attended the UC Davis Institute for Transportation Studies Asilomar Conference, and got to sit through a panel on sustainable freight. Dr. Miyasato made an excellent presentation on behalf of South Coast AQMD, and gave an excellent answer to the question that I asked him about what he would do if he had hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on clean freight. One other thing that came out of that conference I found really interesting was meeting a fleet owner who moves agricultural products out of Santa Maria, Scott Kramer, and he talked about driving around. He always checks the licenses of the other trucks on the road, because he wants to know whether or not they're in compliance with the Air Resources Board's truck refrigeration unit, TRU regulation, which has emission regulations. And there's a database you can check online. And what he's found is that the vast majority, more than 60% of those that he sees on the road, are not registered online on the ARB website. So they're either out of compliance or something is wrong with what they're doing. That combined with I keep hearing that 30% of the trucks on the road are not complying with the diesel particulate filter requirement of the ARB, makes me wonder what we can be doing as a board to be helping ARB with their enforcement issues when it comes to heavy duty trucks. So that's my report. If staff could help figure that out, I would be very appreciative.
I'm not sure that that's the staff's responsibility.
Yeah, I know, it's right, it's ARB's responsibility, but
Right.
perhaps, I mean, there's something we can do to
Maybe the
help.
staff can jab them so that they'll do their job.
Well, along those same lines, though, we have the 1-800-CUT smog, and that's really not our responsibility, but we do it because we want to participate. Maybe there's a way to add that to that, where you can call in and say, hey, I saw a truck that's not compliant, but I don't know if we can do that or not.
So
We can reach out to ARB and discuss.
ARB knows they're not enforcing it. They don't need us to call them and tell them. They need us to put them in a position. They need us to put them in a position where they're forced to enforce their rules. That's what they need. So that's what Kurt needs to be thinking about, is a public interest lawsuit that forces them to make them enforce the rules that they pass.
I'm sure we can help motivate them to do that, Dr. Burke.
Yeah. Yeah, she just cringed.
This just went really
She just
downhill
cringed.
quickly.
She just cringed, but I'll try and make up later. Okay, Dr. Parker and I also attended the 50th anniversary of the state legislative Black Caucus last Saturday night, and I have to say that it was just an amazing, amazing event. I saw so many people there that have been part of this state's history. When you're living every day and you're part of an ongoing saga, you sometimes forget the point that you started at and how fast that you've come. And when they cited, it was just insane to think that my wife wrote a bill that stopped them. In California, women used to have to pay to go to public restrooms. Men did not have to pay. How? Wow. At the same period, women were not allowed to have credit, even a credit card, unless a man signed. This is within our lifetime. I mean, this is not like we're going back into medieval times. And this is California, the most progressive state in the Union. So listening to all the history, I am the last surviving Willie Brown appointee. So Willie Brown spoke at the dinner, and he was just unbelievable, because he said that in his lifetime that he was just amazed at the progress we've made, because representing San Francisco, there was so many laws against gay and lesbian people in San Francisco. So he wrote a bill, he introduced a bill for 7 years, and it never passed. It was always killed in the Senate. So he said in the 8th year, what he did was he had Nate Holden, who was in the Senate, hide in a room. So the opposition to the bill thought that they had enough votes to kill the bill, when in fact, Nate Holden's vote would make it even. And then you'd call in Merv Dimely, who was the lieutenant governor, to break the vote. So he said it was like 1 a.m, and they were all ready to close up, and then Nate Holden walks into the Senate chamber and adds on to the bill. So that made it even. And then in walks Mervyn Dimely, and Willie did a takeoff on his Trinidadian accent. And Merv said, "So what's the count on the bill, man?" and he voted, and that's how that bill was passed. All that happens in our lifetime. Well, you know, we here at this agency have seen similar progress in our lifetime. And I as I went home that night, I was driving home, I started thinking about all the things. I've only been here 25 years, but the amount of progress that we've made in 25 years is just absolutely incredible, you know? So it was a great event. I wish more of you could have been there. It was one worth seeing.
Mr. Chairman, I
Supervisor?
just want to add that that bill was vetoed by the governor and set off a series of demonstrations that really brought my community together in the street.
Yeah.
Led down the line, like so many things, to organizing. Goes from sort of disorganizing to organizing. The other story about that bill, though, is that Senator Green had just undergone surgery and was brought in, I think in a wheelchair, but the legend is, on a
A
stretcher.
stretcher, on a gurney.
To
on a
cast his
gurney.
vote. And it was just, we owe a lot to a lot of different kinds of people over the years. And I just wanted to add that little
Yeah.
piece of the story.
Thank you. Board Member Mitchell wants to defend CARB here.
Right. Thank you very much, Chairman Burke. In defense of CARB. I will rise now. There is a rule in play right now that will require the truckers to go through a smog emissions test when they register their vehicles. So it's going through the process, and you will see that next year. So I agree, enforcement has not been great, but they're working on it. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move, if there are no further comments, we will move to the consent calendar. Items 1 through 19. Anybody, somebody? Supervisor Rutherford?
I need to announce that for agenda item 11, I do not have a financial interest, but I'm required to identify for the record that I'm a board member of Omnitrans, which is involved in the item.
Okay. May I get a motion on this?
I'll
item?
move approval.
There's more speakers.
Mr. Chair, I too am an alternate board member of Omnitrans. I have no financial interest, but I'm disclosing that for the record.
Mayor Cacchiotti?
I'd like to pull items 3 and 6 for some questions.
3 and 6, gotcha.
Thanks.
And,
Okay.
and Mr. Chairman, I need to recuse myself from items involving contracts with those who have made charitable donations to my employer, the Coalition for Clean Air. So I'm recusing myself from agenda item number 3 because Southern California Edison and Los Angeles Department of Water and Power are potential sources of income materially affected by this item. Also, I need to pull item 1 for a motion to correct and item 7 for conversation.
Okay. Then we will take the consent calendar minus items 1, 3, 6, and 7. Okay. We're back to Supervisor Rutherford?
Are you good?
Okay, you finished?
I also need to disclose, I think, on item
Okay.
11.
think Supervisor Ashley wanted to make a statement.
Okay.
Yeah, one of these items in here, it had Riverside County or
RCTC.
was getting a benefit, just have to state that. And of course, I have no financial benefit in any of that, so but just put it on the record.
Same for myself on item 11, I believe it is RCTC. I think it's
Item
getting
11?
money. Yeah,
Okay.
Item 11.
I think that's it.
Okay, and then do we have a motion?
I'll move approval of the remainder of the consent calendar, Mr. Chair.
Second?
And we have a second. Is there any opposition to those items? Hearing none, those items are approved. We will then go to item 1. I think that's Dr.
Thank you.
Lynn.
Yes, I move to amend the minutes from the July 7th meeting. They state that I announced my abstention from items number 9 and 34 at that meeting because Sonoma Tech was a potential source of income. However, Sonoma Tech, my abstention was because of the existence of a contractual relationship between Sonoma Tech and my employer, Coalition for Clean Air, and I think staff has the wording to fix this. So if I can get a second, please.
Second.
Thank you.
All in favor of the item number 1 with the correction?
Aye.
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 Any Anybody opposed? That item is so carried. Item number 3.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. That was the executed contract for the versatile plug-in auxiliary.
I have a conflict on this one, so let me run out.
Okay, Joe.
Which-
This, also called the VAP system. It was very interesting. I was just curious about this applications. Is this the battery powered, if I can, Matt, you can describe this program for us?
I'd be happy to, Councilman. So this is a project that was undertaken by EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute. And the idea is to put a auxiliary battery pack on work trucks or other types of vehicles, then they can use that battery for off-board power. So you can think of a work site where they can plug in their power tools, or you can use it to operate, in some cases, the lift of a boom truck, which was the original application. But that was a costly endeavor because you have to integrate that into the actual vehicle. So their idea in this project was to take just that battery pack and then retrofit it onto different vehicles. So there's 2 projects. One is a small VAPS system. It actually can be used on wheels and transported around. So you can think of that as a small auxiliary power unit. They can go and actually charge vehicles or take to a work site.
Matt, how big, when you say small, can you describe like 2 by 2, or is there?
It's probably the size of a small refrigerator, so the bar refrigerator in your office, it's about that size. And then the other one is something that goes on the back of a work truck. So the original kind of integration of that concept from the original proposal. So this was a proposal we received from EPRI a while ago that the board did approve. And this is kind of the evolution of that. And so we're just seeking funding for this phase.
I support it very much, but I noticed there's parts in for demonstration, so I'd like to recommend you work with our city on one of the small one in South Pasadena. We're one of the first in the United States to have entire city lawn maintenance by electric equipment. And I was talking to some of the guys, and I know they said, well, we've got to power this stuff up. So they have a battery pack on site at one of our large parks or the golf course now, as they're doing the electric blowing, weed whacking, line trimming, edging, et cetera, or the large 60-inch riding lawnmower. They just have something to plug in. And that was always the argument of a lot of these cities, counties, large commercial companies that do this. They say, oh, it's too much trouble. We use it, the battery's out, and we got to wait, a couple hours to try to power it up. And I also know that there was a recommendation for military, police, or fire applications in here too? Or is that
That's right.
So are you looking for people to participate with that, or I noticed there was
Yes.
the last page, it had a
So,
little
yes,
asterisk.
we'd be happy to work with the city of South Pasadena.
Okay, thanks. With that, I'll move approval, Mr. Chair.
Or other cities, right?
We're taking the list now.
All right. Will you move 3 then?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you have a motion and a second already.
Okay, then, is there any opposition to 3? Hearing none, 3 is approved. Item number 6.
Mr. Chair, number 6, I just update on this program. I know it's highly successful. I just want to, I've always wanted to get some materials on this so I could share with my cities in the San Gabriel Valley COG. I know we've been talking about it with the LA Community College Foundation and other groups, and this is kind of evolution. What materials do we have? The frequently asked questions, I know. If you can tell us a little bit about the program, because it's a lot. It's a great program, but there's a lot of people, especially in disadvantaged communities. How do we access it and stuff? I know this addresses some of that, but if you can give the board, because it's a pretty big contract.
Board member, this is Fred Manassian from Technology Advancement Office. We have done close to 2,000 vehicles to date, and we do hold events. We have our website up that applicants can access that. We frequently receive requests from elected officials to provide specific number of applications we have processed within their zip codes. We can immediately provide that to whoever requests that. Any type of data that you would like, we would be happy to provide it to you.
Now, I noticed there was, and if I read it early this morning, I think there's a modification not only in disadvantaged communities, but also near or adjacent to or something like that. What does that mean? So if my city or another city is right next to a disadvantaged community, is there like a mileage radius or something like that, or what's the rule? Because I know they used to go by zip codes and say, oh, my city's on that zip code, but if you're right near that zip code, is there a limit?
It's consistent with the state definition of the CalEnviro screen.
Okay, so if you're near that screen, you're okay.
Yes.
And is it a couple mile radius or what's reasonable?
Yeah, Councilman, so on the website, there's a ability for the applicants to check their eligibility, so they enter their zip code, and then that will then screen them against Cal and Viral Screen. So we just encourage people to go ahead and put their zip code in, and they can determine what level they would qualify for.
And there's something additional we talked about, or near the disadvantaged communities.
Yeah, that's all established by
Oh, it's in there?
ARB through their EFMP program, and so it's, we can get the exact radius, but if they just go on the website, they can check immediately.
Okay, thanks.
And we do have specific data that how many we have awarded within the disadvantaged communities and how many outside and everything like that.
What's the website?
It's called replaceyourride.com, and then we just updated the brochure, so we're happy to give you as much collateral as you need.
Please, yeah, provide me some brochures after the meeting. That's great. Thanks, Matt. I'll move this item if there's any other questions.
Second?
Knock the polls down? We have a motion and a second. Is there any opposition to this item? Hearing none, then item 6 is also approved. Dr. Liu, item 7.
Oh, item 7, this is great. For 10 years, I have tried to figure out why, when we put out a request for a proposal for our contracts for Sacramento lobbyists, that we award 5 points for a local business within the district. And I think I'm on the verge of having figured it out thanks to the help of staff. It turns out that we have a procurement policy that says that we have to add 5 points for local businesses. Now, in the case when we're asking people to do their business in Sacramento, this doesn't make any sense at all. So I've complained about it for a long time. But now that I know that there's a procurement policy and staff has told me that they are willing to amend this procurement policy if so directed by the board, I would ask you, Mr. Chairman, if maybe you could take this up at the administrative committee, and when we are issuing requests for proposals for work that's going to be done outside the district, and we expect it to be done outside the district, that we no longer award extra points for local businesses in those cases. Can you guys take that on for me?
Yeah, I'll take that to administrative committee, no problem.
Thank you very much. With that, I'll move the item.
Second.
What is the definition of a local business?
The definition is that it's a business that performs 90% of the work related to the contract within the geographic boundaries of South Coast AQMD. And if we're going to ask people to lobby in Sacramento, they're not going to do 90% of the work within the geographic
How about
boundaries.
Washington?
Yeah, same thing. Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Got it.
But I want to mention that in the case of lobbyists, some of the Sacramento lobbyists do a lot of work for cities, for example. And they may be representing a bunch of cities in our geographic district. So
You
how do
turn
we
your
break that
microphone on,
down?
please. Your microphone's not on?
You weren't talking into the mic.
Oh,
Can't hear you.
sorry. Sorry, Larry, I'll speak up here. Okay, what I said was that some of the lobbyists, at least I know a couple of firms in Sacramento, who represent a large group of cities that are here in our district. So do we discount them? Because it may be true that a substantial percentage of their business is right here in our air district.
Unfortunately, the definition is worded that they perform the work related to the contract within the boundaries of South Coast AQMD, 90% of that work. So I think, this is obviously, you could be right, but this is an issue that I think could be brought up at administrative committee and the staff could flesh it out. I haven't gotten to all the details of it. But if we expect the work to be done someplace else, like in Washington, D.C. or in Sacramento, we don't expect 90% of it to happen within the district. It doesn't make sense to award extra points.
Yeah, I think for the Washington lobbyist, doesn't make any sense, but for the Sacramento, there may be a little glitch there, and we want to take a look at that. That's all I'm mentioning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're going to get Joe a hobby. Don't worry about it. I'm going to take him to the fish store with me and get him some tropical fish, so he has something to do. But we will definitely take this up to the admin committee. Okay, okay. With that being said, we have a motion and a second on 8. Is there any opposition to 8?
7, Dr. Burke.
I'm sorry, 7. 7. Hearing none, 7 is approved. Okay. Items 21 through 27. I'll accept a motion on those items unless there's some discussion. Any opposition? Hearing none, those items are approved. Item 28. We have a staff presentation.
Good morning, I'm Susan, 28? Sorry.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman,
Susan, what happened, man? Was that the presentation?
Mr. Chairman, this is a routine item that we bring to the board every year. We can waive the staff presentation if you wish.
Second?
Is there any opposition to approving 28? Hearing none, 28 is approved. Item 29. Susan, I like, oh, at least you're back. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, I'm Susan Nakamura, Assistant DEO in Planning and Rules, and I'm presenting today on Proposed Amended Rule 1401. By way of background, Rule 1401 is the gatekeeper for all new modified permits. They're required to meet specific health risk thresholds. Under Rule 1401, the rule was adopted or was amended in June 2015 to incorporate the 2015 OEHA health risk guidelines for estimating health risk. And the 2015 OEHA guidelines incorporated the child-specific factors, which the estimated health risk would increase by about 2.5 times when a facility didn't have any increase in emissions. We incorporated the 2015 OEHA guidelines into our South Coast SCAQMD risk assessment procedures, which was version 8.0. During the amendments in June 2015, we did hold back 2 source categories, spray booths and gasoline dispensing facilities, to allow them to continue using the previous guidelines, which we refer to as version 7.0. Staff needed additional time to better understand the impacts for permitting for spray booths and gasoline dispensing facilities. So the proposal today is there's 3 elements. The first is to, we have conducted our analysis and we want to remove the exemption for spray booths and gasoline dispensing facilities, and we would require these facilities to now use the most recent updated risk assessment procedures, which is we refer to as version 8.1. This version 8.1 would include the 2015 OEHA guidance for the 2 source categories of gasoline dispensing facilities and spray booths. We would also incorporate CARB's 2013 emission factors for refueling or for gasoline dispensing, with the exception of the refueling emission factors, which I'll discuss in the key issues, and the speciation profiles, update the air dispersion modeling and the meteorological data. And then also the third element is to update the list of toxic air contaminants, and that OEHA has made some modifications and to reflect that in our Rule 1401. So as we look at the permitting impacts, we looked at past permitting actions to understand what we potentially could see in the future. We looked at 5 years of data for spray booths, and for new gasoline dispensing facilities, we looked at 7 years worth of data. And as we look at implementing the health risk guidelines in version 8.1 for spray booths, we see about possibly 2 spray booths per year that could be impacted. These particular spray booths were using chromate-based primers. They were already required in the permitting actions to have air pollution controls. They may need to upgrade their air pollution controls to stay under the health risk thresholds from HEPA to ULPA. For gasoline dispensing facilities, we saw no impacts for any modified gas stations, but as we look at new gasoline dispensing facilities, about less than 1 facility per year on average could find themselves needing to conduct a more refined health risk assessment. Instead of using a lookup table, they would conduct a more detailed health risk assessment, bringing in specifics about their facility. These facilities that we looked at, they're relatively close to residential sensitive receptors, schools, houses, and so that's why their health risk was higher. As we look at in terms of the potential impacts for adding the toxic air contaminants and changes from OEHA, we saw no additional impacts. Those particular toxic air contaminants are already regulated under existing rules and regulations, or they had health values and endpoints that were more substantial for chronic or health effects. All of these updates on these added risk values were for acute levels. I'd like to highlight the one remaining key issue that we have. It relates to the refueling emission factor for when you're refueling with a Phase 2 enhanced vapor recovery system, or and for vehicles that have ORVR, which is the onboard refueling vapor recovery systems. And the issue at hand is that we believe that the 2013 emission factor overestimates the amount of emission reductions associated with these two types of control strategies. At the request of the Stationary Source Committee, we did have a 4th working group meeting, and we had CARB present. CARB did present additional information on the emission factor, and they had reported that there is a new study that's not quite yet published, but they have committed to revise the emission factor for ORVR and EVR for the refueling emission factor. So staff is recommending that we hold back on that one emission factor to allow CARB to finish that process, and that when they finish that process, we're committed to come back to the board and then to revise our emission factor for the refueling. So just to make it a little clearer in terms of what we're changing for the refueling emission factors, on all the points of the emission factors, we're in agreement. We're going to revise those emission factors, and it's just the one category of refueling that there'll be no change. That's the version 7.0 refueling emission factor. So recommended action today is to adopt the resolution, determine that the proposed amendments to Rule 1401 are exempt from CEQA, and we ask that you adopt the proposed amended Rule 1401. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nasty, did you have some comments, or now or later?
We can do it after this, Dr. Burke.
Okay. Dr. Parker?
Yes, Susan. Oh, as I read this detailed report, the vaporized recovery system on gasoline dispensing, what improvement is this going to have on making those less, the actual vapors that are going to be emitted into the air, less than what it is currently right now?
The onboard vapor recovery systems are a system, a canister that's built into the vehicle, and so they capture the vapors, the running vapors, and also when you're refueling, and they go through the canister, and then the vapors are recirculated back into to use for the vehicle. So that's something that's been on vehicles as new vehicles are manufactured, the ORVRs are being incorporated. So that's a current system. The Phase 2 vapor recovery systems are the nozzles that you see at the refueling pump, and those, it's been in use for quite a while now. And so the whole discussion is those two in combination, what is the overall emission reductions? CARB is saying that all remaining emission reductions from ORVR are captured through the nozzle. Our concern is that that not all of them. New study that they have is saying that we're probably somewhere in the middle, and so that's what the main discussion is.
So will everyone have to update their recovery systems based on this new rule?
No. As manufacturers manufacture the vehicles, all the new vehicles are equipped with ORVR. It's not a retrofit requirement.
Okay.
We have some testimony on this item. Mr. Lamar, would you like to come to the microphone there? That's particularly convenient for that seat. You know, that's a premium seat. We charge extra for that seat.
I paid my dues.
Okay, yeah, right.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Burke, members of the board. I'm Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance. On behalf of our member trade associations, and in particular, the California Independent Oil Marketers Association, CIOMA, I want to extend our appreciation to the staff for agreeing to revisit and reevaluate the refueling emission factor to account for emission reductions from enhanced vapor recovery and the onboard refueling vapor recovery system, as well as to CARB, who has agreed to reevaluate their 2013 emission factor recommended for gasoline dispensing stations. Some small businesses would otherwise be caught in the middle of this longstanding disagreement, if you will. Naturally, SCAQMD and the Alliance would expect to be involved in whatever discussions both agencies have and to provide input into the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comment? There's no more testimony on this item. Any comment by my colleagues? No, he's just not erased. He was up there.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of staff's recommendation.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Would the clerk call the roll? Supervisor Ashley? Thank you. The motion passes 12-0. Did you want to make a comment, Mr. Nasser?
Sure, Dr. Burke. You had inquired about our rule and control measure forecast, specifically about the status of Rule 415 from animal rendering facilities. And when we developed the control measure forecast last year, we had originally scheduled this rule to come before the board in October of this year. Given all the other challenges that we face with regards to the metal finishing facilities and our investigative work within Paramount, we had tried to push that off. And we were looking at pushing that off through later this year, and we had actually moved it on the calendar. I know you had some concerns about that, so I wanted to make sure that we provided you with an update of sort of where we are and get your thoughts and input to that.
What?
Your thoughts?
You mean my concerns?
Sure.
My concerns are, you know, I think that I don't think that this agency should be viewed as doing one thing at a time. You know, we're a multitasking agency, and we have serious problems across a myriad of fronts. So we have to deal with them in a broad spectrum manner. So my attitude is I want to see this item brought forward as quickly as possible. If it can't be in October, November would be okay. But this has been waiting a long time. So we need to get on with the business of the district. So I would encourage you to no later than November.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I ask Wayne a question?
Sure.
Just following up, and I know with the limited staff resources that we're spread thin, can you do it in November or is December a compromise? I know you're trying to work with your staff and you've got, you know, we had this discussion the other day at my job, and we just don't have the resources to be suing the entire federal government at the state attorney general's level. We've got to pick and choose which of the 50 lawsuits we're filing against the administration. With your staff, Wayne, can you do it by November, or do you really need December?
What I'd like to do is report back to committee in the coming next week and have a chance to sit down with staff. From my understanding, quite a bit of work had already been accomplished. It was a question on, we sort of put it on hold. I just need to sort of assess where we are with regards to potential notifications. If we're good on the CEQA notification, we can go with a 30-day notice, then we could do November, possibly December. December I can commit to. November is going to be difficult, but I think we might be able to swing it. I just want to make sure to confer with staff and then report back to committee on where we're moving forward.
Is that a fair compromise, Mr. Chair?
Okay.
I want to push him, but I just want to make sure he has the army to do it.
And, you know, if they need some more resources, they ought to ask for them. Because you can't let the mission. So I'm looking for November. Caccioti says December. December is going to be a unusual month for us, I think. So if you can make November, I think you should make November. If it absolutely is impossible and you have to slip to December, I'd grudgingly, you know, go to that.
We'll
Okay.
shoot for November, but as I said, I'll report back to committee.
That would be wonderful if you
Thank
could
you.
do that. Okay, we're on item 30. And, we have some public comment. Okay, item 30, do we have a staff presentation?
That would be me, Dr. Burke.
Okay.
Okay, following the disruption of the June governing board meeting, the staff began looking at agency policies and practices to prevent similar disruptions in the future. Next slide, please. One of the items that we reviewed were the governing board's meeting procedures. The proposed changes to the meeting procedures were put on the board's agenda in July. One of the changes we had recommended was reducing the maximum amount of time for a member of the public to testify from 3 minutes to 1.5 minutes. There was a concern expressed over that change by stakeholders, and so the item was continued, and the chair directed staff to conduct a stakeholders meeting to review the proposed changes. We had a stakeholders meeting on August 10, and based on comments received, we're now recommending that the board retain the 3-minute time limit for comments by members of the public. Next slide. We're proposing other changes to the board meeting procedures, primarily in 3 areas, with respect to public decorum, public testimony, and disruptions. Most of these changes were arrived at by comparing the board's meeting procedures against meeting procedures adopted by the 4 counties that are located within the geographic boundaries of the district. In addition, we're recommending a change to the provision regarding speakers cards and also a couple of changes regarding the authority of the chair that will make the procedures consistent with board practice. Next slide. With respect to decorum, there are 2 new provisions that we're proposing to add. First, a provision that would prohibit the public from crossing into the area between the dais and the podium. Second is a provision regarding congregating in the aisles and blocking the doorways. Next slide. We are proposing adding a new provision addressing disruptions. The provision first defines disruptions as willful interruption of a meeting that makes continuing the meeting infeasible. The provision then provides examples of disruptions, including yelling, boisterous conduct, generally preventing the orderly conduct of a meeting. These definitions are important because speakers causing disruptions can be removed from a meeting. We received comments at the August 10 meeting regarding the provision that defined disruptions as speaking on a subject that is not before the board. And we changed it to say that that speakers could be removed for willfully speaking on topics not before the board. The provision would allow the chair to order the removal of anyone disrupting a meeting which is sanctioned by the Brown Act. Next slide. The section would also authorize the board to allow someone who has been removed from a meeting to return by a vote of the board. Next slide. With regard to time limits on individual public comments, we had initially proposed reducing the time limit to 1.5 minutes. We're recommending that the time limit stay at 3 minutes. We are, however, recommending a change in the language. As it's currently worded, the provision suggests that the 3-minute time limit is a minimum amount of time granted to speakers, and so we're recommending a clarification that would indicate that the 3 minutes is a maximum. We're also recommending a provision required by state law that gives speakers that are testifying with the assistance of a translator twice the time granted to other speakers. Next slide. We're also recommending a change that would require that speaker cards be submitted prior to the board's consideration of an item. And then finally, we're recommending a couple of cleanup items that would make the procedures consistent with board practice by authorizing the chair to adjourn meetings and take items out of order. That concludes my presentation.
Other than myself, were there any other board members who participated in this discussion? Since it's a policy of the board, I would think that you would want to get my colleagues' input in this. And it just hit me as you were going through the changes that I bet you didn't talk to anybody but me.
I did not.
Well, at least they get a shot now.
Supervisor Kuehl.
Oh, okay. Well, we have a number of them that want to speak now, so maybe this is what's coming in. Supervisor Kuehl?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you go back to the slide about willfully speaking on a subject not before the board? In public comment at the end, which would be included in these rules, I believe that's inappropriate in the first place. I think people can speak on anything they want, whether it's before the board or not. So is this in a section that does not relate to public comment, but only to comment on items on the agenda?
It is not. It's in a general provision regarding disruptions.
Okay, well, that I think then is quite in error. In my own opinion, I think in public testimony or public comment, people can come in and talk about their Aunt Sue. I mean, it really doesn't matter.
So
and
Supervisor, if I
many
might.
do. The second thing is, it's interesting to me what that means. I'm speaking for 3 minutes. I'm presenting testimony to the board about an item on the agenda, but for one of the minutes, I wander into a story on something else. No matter what I say, I am willfully speaking. And I don't know how we would then ascertain if I am willfully speaking about a subject not before the board, or if I think I'm making a connection between this story about my Aunt Sue's cancer and this item on the board. So I think this is a bit of a weird section. I think there may be some better way to put it, but I have a concern about that. I do understand the concern. That is, someone gets up on item 3 and starts talking about, last year's item 6 or whatever. And that is disruptive because they may have lost an item already and want to come back and talk about it. And I see that as the intent of this section. So I think that it is not, when we say not before the board, you mean the specific item upon which they intended to speak. So I think this needs clarification, this particular one. I mean, the rest of it, I think is good. I had a question about the 3-minute limit. So if a person signs up to speak on 3 items, they get 9 minutes?
That's correct.
Okay. Other boards have made other decisions about this, but this board seems to have sort of less of an issue with people speaking on multiple items than many of the sort of local government, other kinds of local government boards. But so with that one comment then about how we might clarify the issue of speaking on a subject not before the board, because though item 3 might have been settled, it's still an item before the board when I come up on item 4 and talk about item 3. So I think it needs some clarification.
Thank you. I have a question with regard to the provision of requiring the speakers to fill out a comment card before the item begins. And there were a couple of things that I'm concerned about. One, and I can tell you this has happened. 10 years ago, before I was appointed, I sat out in that audience. An issue came up. I had my card in on time beforehand, but I came up and spoke. I addressed a subject in which another person in the audience didn't agree with me. And then he quickly filled out a card, came in, gave it to the clerk, and made his comments, which I didn't agree with, but he made his comments, but he didn't think he needed to. If we set up this policy so that you have to have your speaker card in before the discussion starts on the item, then I think everybody in the audience would be smart to turn in a card no matter what. And I don't think that helps. I have the same goal of running the meetings efficiently, but I think that what we are doing is asking for a very inefficient process where 100 people sign up and maybe 25 of them end up speaking, and the other 75 tell us, oh no, that's okay, I don't need to speak. So I like the current policy. I think that's actually worked okay. Also, in the letter we received here from Yvonne Watson, she points out how big the district is, and I was thinking, yeah, if you're coming in from the nether reaches of Supervisor Rutherford's district, and you just happen to get here a minute later than you missed the deadline because you didn't turn in your speaker card, all of a sudden you made that trip for no reason. We have a really big district, and I think it is hard for people to get here. I like this idea of remote meetings, but I don't think people should be penalized if they're getting their card in a minute late or something like that. I'd rather err on the side of having too much testimony than too little. So I know I asked this of you as staff, but do you agree that we might end up getting more cards rather than fewer than needed if we tell people they have to put their cards in first?
Let me say this. Yesterday, I had an appointment at TSA out at the airport, and I was 2.5 minutes late, and they wouldn't take me.
How'd you feel about that?
Is that
It's a
supposed to
long
be a
way
good
from my house
example
to
for
the
us or a
airport.
bad
You
example
know?
for us?
But,
If
I
only
walked
you knew
away-
the assembly member who represented the airport.
Right. I didn't even get there. But I understand, though, that the rules are the rules. That's why we have rules.
Right, we're deciding on what the rule should be.
Right.
So I think the rule that we have has been working okay on this particular aspect. I agree with everything else in here. I mean, I think that Supervisor Kuehl raises a very good point about that item, and we probably should address that too. But other than those two things, the rest of it looks okay to me.
why don't we do this? Why don't we take everybody's concern and send it back to the group and have them discuss it instead of, because, or we could vote on each change you want to and see what the consensus of the board is. I'm willing to do it either way. Supervisor Ashley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I think Supervisor Kuhl is right on that. When they get up on public comment, they ought to be able to read a recipe if they want to. But when they're speaking on a subject, they should speak to the subject. When it becomes clear that they're not, they're just using the time, then we ought to be able to step in. So, that may be hard to define, but when they're speaking on one, they're on item 4 and they're clearly speaking on item 3, well, that's it. You can direct them back. If they don't get them back on the subject, then it's up to the chairman and to decide it, I think. Also, then on the serial speakers, you'll get this. This happens in city councils and in boards. Somebody wants to be disruptive. They'll speak on 8 items just to cause, basically disrupt the meeting or disturb the meeting. You might put a limit of a total of so many minutes or so many items to try to get. I think we ought to try to address that, because if we haven't had that problem, you're going to have it. And let's see, I had one other item. What was on the card? I think they should just, on the card, they should just fill out a card before they speak. I mean, while the discussions go on, they should be able to take a card down as long as the item's open, present a card, and speak. They shouldn't just be able to just get up and just walk up there without giving a card. And if they do, say fill out a card, and we'll let you speak. Fill out a card first. Shouldn't have to do it before the item and be locked out. Thank you. And that I like them. I think it's a very good approach. I like the thrust of this.
I think everyone has mentioned each of the items that I will be addressing. Willfully speaking on a subject not before the board. I think that at public comment period, maybe we should consider some degree of limitation on that particular aspect. And I won't waste all the time of giving my reasons why, but I think that would be probably appropriate, because someone may have 4 or 5 different items that they want to speak on. The serial one is the one that I think that this board, as well as other ones, should really be very cognizant of. We do have organized opposition to come, and we'll have dozens of people who want to come up. And I have one day, as I sat here, I recorded 17 people more or less saying the same thing over and over and over again. And I just think that to that extent, the chair should have the prerogative, along with the board's consent, of requesting that those kind of organized oppositions get together and have some kind of spokesperson. I don't think it should be an option. I think it should be a requirement. A requirement because of the fact that other people's time, not only that of ours, but others who are sitting in the audience who want to speak should be allowed to do so. We've sat here sometime for 4 or 5 hours, not 5 hours, but at least 4 hours, listening to the same comments being repeated. And I think that's something that we really should take very serious consideration of.
Member Mitchell?
Thank you, Chairman Burke. To the point that Supervisor Kuhl raised, I agree with her concerns on that. I think when we're talking about public comment, the rule could be that they have to speak upon an issue that is within the authority of our agency. I don't think they should be coming up here and talking about Aunt Sue unless Aunt Sue has some issue that is related to something within our jurisdiction. So that could be narrowed. And I think what was meant also, or under that item, willfully speaking on an agenda, coming before us for an agenda item and then not speaking on that agenda item, that could be reworded to be more specific for that particular instance. But public comment raises another issue. I think they should, any person in the public can address us on any matter that we may have authority over. The other thing about having to sign up to speak before the item actually comes up, I think Joe's point is well taken, Dr. Liu's point, because as you're listening to other speakers, it occurs to you, as the example that Dr. Liu raised, that there may be something you want to say in response to what that speaker has put forward. And if you haven't signed up before the item comes up on the agenda, you're out of luck. And so I think that needs to be addressed too. The serial speakers issue that Dr. Parker raised, and that idea could be applied to organized groups, but you have to pay attention to the fact that it's an organized group, and then you could limit to an organized group a certain number of speakers, because it is true that we will have an item come up and we hear the same thing over and over again. There is some merit to reiteration of a health issue. It really drives it home to us that this is a big problem in this community. So I would be cautious on how we address that and how we might limit that. But it is true that, and as you all know, sometimes hours are spent hearing the same type of comment over and over again. So anyway, those are my comments as we send this back for some more work. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe what has led us here today with seeking some changes to how we conduct meetings is the disruption that took place in front of this body. So the disruption, obviously, we want to hold a meeting that is peaceful, that's democratic, that's efficient. And if you want to see how disruptions are handled, I encourage you to view Channel 35 and my council president, Herb Wesson, textbook example of how to handle a disruption, because we have a cast of characters, I'm sure you all too, in your respective cities and counties, that come to the council chambers or the county chambers, and their ultimate goal is to raise hell and disrupt the meeting to the point where they're asked to leave. So it's up to, I know, the chair, and we have to ask ourselves, first, identify the disruption and who is disrupting a meeting, and then after so many warnings, ask that person to leave the chambers, and with the assistance of the Sergeant of Arms. Our end goal is to get through the agenda and do so in a peaceful, democratic manner. And I believe what took place here a few months back was unacceptable. It was disruptive to the point where those who were here in the audience, staff and those visiting, and went against, it was actions that was unfair for those who were here to listen and to contribute and to be heard. So looking forward to, again, having some civility to, the AQMD meetings, and this doesn't happen every month, but I can tell you, again, in fact, we can turn on Channel 35 now. You're going to hear public comment and see how Council President Herb Wesson conducts himself in a peaceful and graceful manner, and something I think that we should take note of. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just Council, I think to summarize some of the issues, since this is open board meeting and this is kind of how we do it. The question I originally raised about speaking on an item not before the board, I think the way around that is to make it much more specific. That is, when you put in a request to speak, we grant the request to speak based on your, what you asked for. And you signed up to speak for item 3. Now, you may have signed up to speak for item 4 as well, but there you are on item 3. You come up on item 3 and you're not speaking on item 3, then I think we can consider that kind of testimony that we would either say, if you're not going to speak to this item, please save it for public comment. Or, you know, if it's, I don't know whether I would put it in the section where a person can be dragged away for it, but, you know, a way to limit it to that item instead of items before the board, because that I think is too open. Secondly, the question about when a person can turn in their card. I heard more people on the board seem to feel it might be important to allow people to turn in their cards during the discussion on the item. I don't know, you know, that we went back and forth on it, but it seemed to me that that was more the sentiment that I heard. The question raised by the supervisor about total minutes, considering we are allocating 3 minutes for each comment for each item, it may be good to adopt, you know, I mean, even 9 minutes is a lot when a lot of people do it, but you may want to, we may want to consider a maximum number of minutes. The thing that you get into with that, if it's minutes and not items, which has, I think, a sort of a First Amendment connotation, is that people should be allowed then to allocate their 9 minutes, which gets us into people coming up and saying, I'm speaking on 5 items, so I'd like to spend 2 minutes on this one. But we handle it that way, and you know, you get then to say how you allocate your total. In terms of the reduction of time, I believe that we could have a rule, we don't have one in there at the moment, that if more than 20 people sign up to speak on an item, because that would be an hour's testimony, or if more than 10 people, whatever number we would pick, the chairman has the discretion to reduce the maximum time to 2 minutes, or where it exceeds 35 people, 1 minute, or something like that. You know, something, I think that sort of helps. The question, though, about duplicative speech, I think I really understand, but I don't think you can say to someone, you may not testify because someone already said that. Even if they come up with the same statement, as many times organizations have brought their members, this is their interaction with their representative government. They do need to be able to speak and say whatever they want. So I think this question of reducing time overall, when more than X number of people have signed up in the discretion of the chair, is a better way to handle it than, every board I'm on. It's the real people who come up and say the same thing over and over. But they really, it's an experience for them, and they need to be able, to do it. And that's why they come to do it. I think that covered. The only thing I would say, instead of translators, I believe interpreters is the word used most often in terms of doubling time. Not the biggest thing. The last item about public comment must be related to something within our jurisdiction. I agree. That's the best way to go. I think we have to distinguish between the chair being able to interrupt people and ask them to stay on topic and the section that allows ejection from the room. Because I think in public comment, if people start talking about something and they think we can do something about cars and, it's like, no, that's CARB. I think we need some discretion about that.
Yeah, this has been a nice round table. This has been a good
Comment slips on this.
panel for
Bill Lamar is the first one. one microphone, and would Yvonne Watson come to the other microphone, please? Mr. Lamar?
Hello? Oh, sorry. Good morning, Dr. Burke, members of the board. I'm Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance. At the last governing board meeting, when staff presented their proposed changes to your meeting procedures, my members and I were alarmed when one of the recommendations was to reduce the time for individual public comment from 3 minutes to 90 seconds. So many of the issues brought before the board are complex, and stakeholders on all sides of the issue often have strong opinions. And this is the forum, they see this forum as an opportunity, maybe the only one, to make you aware of them. As a representative for many small businesses, I can assure you that it is difficult enough to convince small business owners to take time away, several hours sometimes, from their daily operations to drive to Diamond Bar and make you aware of their positions on certain issues in the 3 minutes allowed under the current meeting procedures. It would be next to impossible to convince them that this board has any interest in what they have to say if they were only allowed 90 seconds to deliver their message. I want to commend the executive officer for personally leading the August 10th stakeholder meeting where these proposed changes were discussed. And while some undoubtedly thought that the changes were too harsh, the members of the Alliance believe that some of the proposed changes are long overdue. Like many of you, the Alliance members have some reservations about some of the other proposed changes, but we are adamant in our opposition to reducing public comment period from 3 minutes down to 90 seconds. Thank you.
Hello, board and staff. My name is Yvonne Watson. I'm speaking here as an individual and as a member of the Sierra Club. I want to thank the board right away and the staff for removing the changes to the 3-minute public orals, because that was my main concern, and I share the concerns of the gentleman who just spoke. I also want to thank you for adding the satellite sites and for holding meetings in some of the locations that are most impacted. The letter you have in front of you, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. You have it right there to read. I just wanted to make these recommendations and let you be aware of it, that people do come from long distances to speak, and it would be nice to give some consideration to those people, because I know that some of the people who do travel are feeling like they're not being heard, and if you were to make some changes that would further impact their ability to speak, it would just reinforce that idea. The other thing I wanted to mention was about this item about the credentialed press. If you take that in conjunction with the change about congregating the aisles, I do totally agree with you that we need to make sure that the aisles are clear, and that is a safety issue because of fire codes. But under the Brown Act, the public has just as much right to record public meetings as members of the press. And when you have change, like the podium is set right here, it makes it difficult for members of the public, if they want to be recording someone, if they don't get the seat right here next to me, they won't be able to actually record the person they want to record who's speaking. Or if they need to take photographs, you're going to have people in the back with their cell phones up in the air like this, trying to take photos. So it does seem like it's a matter of fairness that you provide some area where, and if it's just a temporary, like, okay, this is for you if you want to record one person who's speaking, or take a photograph of one person who's speaking, you have a chance to just come up, take your photo or your video, and then leave. Just some sort of provision for that. I am really, really distressed, though, when I hear all this talk about limiting people from speaking if they're a part of a group. That is totally not what the Brown Act is about. I'm today here in civilian clothes. I'm not wearing my Sierra Club t-shirt. But if I was wearing my Sierra Club t-shirt, and let's say there's 50 people behind me wearing a Sierra Club t-shirt, that doesn't mean I'm not an individual. And if you have large groups of people who want to speak, they're passionate about what they want to speak on. So I would just caution you that you would be trampling on the rights of all those people as individuals. You know, just because we join a group doesn't mean we've become a part of a hive mind and that's it. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. Thank you.
Stuff came from. Like the minute and a half and where did all that originate?
Dr. Burke, it was based on a review of the time limits that the counties had adopted. And there's no county that has a minute and a half.
Oh, yeah, I do remember now. We looked at, I think it was LA County, right? What do you guys do down at,
It's longer than that for people testifying.
how long is it?
We have 3 minutes and we limit to 2 minutes when it's a larger crowd, or sometimes 1 minute.
Does it
But
go
it's not
down,
about
does it
the fact that
progressively
they're
step
all from one
down?
group. It's just,
Like you said, does it progressively?
yeah, the chair will say at the beginning, we have 50 requests to speak, therefore, in the interest of time, we're going to limit to 90 seconds.
I think that's an excellent idea.
But it's for everybody. It's for the advocates and the people opposing
sure,
and the,
sure,
you know,
sure.
Industry, et cetera.
Yeah.
If I may, Mr. Chair, in the city of Los Angeles, if we have one speaker that has filled out multiple speaker cards, we give them 5 minutes to speak on the multiple speaker cards, and in addition, give them the 2 minutes to speak on a non-agenda item.
Yeah, we do the same. We have a
thing.
6-minute limit for each person, individual person, on multiple items. But I mean, on one item where you have a bunch of people sign up. It's generally 3 minutes.
Would you like to make an amending motion?
I think we have given the council so many different
We have one
pieces of
person less to
inputs.
speak, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure we're prepared to change all of this today, or I'll just speak for myself. I think we ought to look at some new language next time.
Okay, that's fine with me. Harvey, can we get your opinion on this?
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Harvey Eder, speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition and 80–90% of the population of the U.S. that wants to see solar used and converted to solar. I think the fact that only Dr. Burke attended this group, I think that this should be continued, like Commissioner Kuehl's suggested, and that it be a hearing. And I think these issues might be illegal or legal different. There's all kinds of different models under the Brown Act. And something that frustrates me is always having, to come and try to see what's on the agenda and then fill out cards. I was going to do that this morning. There were numerous things I wanted to talk to you before, and you're talking about, controlling that as well. I believe these have to be put out and made public in a hard copy 72 hours in advance, which means coming down here on Tuesday to pick it up. At the very least, hard and soft, online. But anyway, that's basically it. I signed to talk about some stuff in general comment. Some of that I've hit on, but
there are a number of my colleagues who agree with you on the hard copy 72-hour thing.
Okay, we'll go for that then.
Yeah.
All righty.
Now, so the question becomes, what kind of format do we want to send this back into? Do we want to do a hearing before the next board meeting, say we meet at 8:30 and set aside a half hour to discuss this after everybody's had a chance to look at this? Or do we want to send it to the admin committee? What is the pleasure of the board? Supervisor?
I think we ought to see if there are any changes, a new version first, the whole board, and I think as soon as possible. The admin committee seems the right place to me for rulemaking about the procedure of a meeting. And I think if each board member sees the copy, sooner rather than later of proposed changes, we can make comments to the members of the admin committee, to yourself, and, give comment that way. We've had some public comment. Generally, people do think that the Brown Act requires things that it doesn't actually require, because even the Constitution is limited by time, place, and manner. And things like minute limits, there's no magic to 3 minutes either. If the Brown Act didn't allow you to limit, then people could speak forever. But there is an allowance for orderly process that allows free speech, and I think that's the way we'll go. So we will have public comment on these proposed rule next time if we vote to put it off, and I think it has to be made public.
Why don't we do this? Why don't you send out the changes that we were going to make to all the board members this afternoon? Because you have them, so it should be easy to email it to them. And then we'll consider them at the next admin committee meeting, which is from a week from today. And then if we will make any changes, we can hold public testimony there too. We can take public testimony in admin. So then if we make changes there, we'll send those changes back out to the board members and have it considered at the October board meeting. How's that?
I'd like to say that I agree with that process. I think that's a good one. Obviously, I think we need to put whatever proposed changes we come up with on our website so everybody can have access to them. And I would suggest that council focus on what the actual law, the wording in the law on the willful disruption and stuff, that has to do with the disruption more than it does with speaking off topic. And also, I believe there's a couple of Attorney General opinions on Brown Act and Bagley-Keene that we can probably rely on. And so to base whatever we're going to do in this rather nuanced wording on those sources primarily, and then the other examples of other agencies if necessary. I think we're getting closer to consensus than it actually sounds like. But I think that's a good way to proceed.
Great. Mr. Adams, stay there, because that concludes this item, and we've set up the process we're going to do. So we're going to go to public comment now.
Okay.
So why don't you stay there and hit the public comment.
All right. Three things. Community choice energy, which has been known as community choice aggregation. Also a discussion I had about premature deaths with staff in the socioeconomic, political economic, the value of deaths when looking at solar costs is as high or higher than the actual fuel cost replacement if we convert everything to solar. And we're looking at going to solar now with Senator DeLeon's legislation by 100% by 2045. So it's time to really get into the weeds on this. There were two studies that were done, one by CARB using one number and another by the district for the plan and for the SIP, and I really wasn't aware of that until this morning, and I'm going to try to find out more about it. But it seemed like there should have been coordination to compare apples to apples and apples to oranges. Each death in the district, premature death in this plan, is $9 million per. In the 12 plan, it was $7 million per premature death. And, in the 12 plan, it was 7, and it was 3.5 in the 7. Anyway, I think these numbers have to really, and then there are all kinds of numbers like Jacobson and whatnot are using much higher numbers, and looking at other causes of death, like for renewable natural gas, the cost to society done by CDC, et cetera, of antibiotics, drug-resistant antibiotics. There is a lot of activity in the area on community choice. The county has passed this, and there are a few cities that have joined. It seems like this board has been the bulk of the representation among the cities the county's already passed. We've got, Mike in Pasadena, and board member Hewen from her areas. Mitchell from her area as well. There's been, this needs to be addressed more by the board and by the district, and maybe even there's activity in San Bernardino and Riverside, and I've heard of activity as well in Orange County, and there is a bit of tension that's happened basically between LA and South Bay COG, and I think that should be understood better by folks. Okay. Any questions?
Thank you very much for your testimony.
All right, thank you.
Would Renee Allison, Seal Beach, come to the microphone? And would Stephen Stubaski come to the other vacant microphone? Your name for the record, please.
Good morning. My name is Renee Allison, and I am here representing the residents of Seal Beach. And there was an angry mob that wanted to come here today, about 12 people, and instead, myself and Mr. Stasoyski came. So we're hoping that you'll be a little bit lenient on time, because having 12 people speak for 3 minutes is a lot longer than having us speak for about 5. And we're here because for the last 2 years, the cities of Seal Beach and surrounding cities, Huntington Beach and Long Beach, have been bombarded by such a foul, toxic petrochemical odor. And I'm sure many of you are aware of it. In fact, I've emailed some of you about it this past week. And when I contacted fire, police, and Coast Guard, I was surprised to find out that there's no protocols for the complaints to them about these odors. So I'm looking to you, I'm urging you to listen to what we have to say today and then take the recommendations very seriously so I don't have to show up here again next month. I'm very aware of the protocol. I've done my research. When there is a receptor, which means that 3 residents report or complain about an odor, that an investigator is sent out. By the time that investigator gets out to where we think the odor is coming from, whether if it's offshore or onshore, that the wind could have changed directions, the odor can be somewhere else, and even if he does smell it, he has to get a witness. What I'm asking today is for you to acknowledge that something should already be in place. And this map that you see up here, and I'm sorry it's not clearer, but this is 1 week. This was 1 week, the last week of July, this past summer. And it goes to show you that there was 3 episodes, and you can see by the different stars and squares and circles that because of the wind, or what was the source of this air, of this foul odor, we don't know, right? So was it an ocean-going vessel? Was it something on land? We're unsure. And as a health educator, if you look at page 2 of that booklet that I gave you, and you'll see the many, many health effects, negative health effects that the residents are having. There's no doubt in my mind that this is toxic. In fact, there was a representative from the AQMD that confirmed that there was a petrochemical trace in the air. So as you read down this list of symptoms, I want you to think about being awakened from sleep with such a foul smell in your nostrils that you think, oh, is there a leak in my house? Within 15 minutes, getting a migraine. Within 15 minutes, having burning in your nose and sinuses. And depending on your health condition, wheezing and coughing, a sore throat that the next day you can't even speak right. And people were vomiting. People were getting nauseous. People were having dizziness, dizzy spells. You would not want this for yourself, your spouses, or your children. So why would you want any of your communities to have this? So what we're recommending is very simple. It's just a 1, 2, 3, and it's on page 1 at the bottom. We're looking for you to immediately install ambient air monitors throughout Old Town and the Hill neighborhoods to measure the trace petroleum compounds. I can't wait for Craig Morris, who's been assigned to this project, to get out to the pier and see if there's any petrochemical in the air. And we need to appoint a specific investigator to efficiently monitor the samples collected and match any hazardous release with the OGVs in the area. And the final recommendation is that if you do have jurisdiction over the offshore platforms, to provide the operating permits and maintenance records to show compliance with conditions, minimizing the periodic release of produced gases. If the AQMD does not have jurisdiction over these platforms, which agency does, and can the district intervene on our behalf? It's been 2 years. It's getting more intense. It's getting more intermittent. Something has to be done. I don't want to be back here in a month asking you, please, you have the data. Yesterday, the AQMD emailed me 13 documents, 13 reports that I requested at the beginning of this month. I have another job. I'm a health educator. I didn't have time to look at these 13 reports. I just, quickly reviewed them. But there's data in there. You have the data. Please, let's take action. Thank you.
Don't leave the mic.
Okay.
Stephen.
Dr. Burke, Board of Governors, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Stephen Stasowski. I am here with Renee Allison, and in light of Agenda Item 30, I hope not to duplicate some of what she said, but add to it. I represent hundreds, if not thousands, of residents in Seal Beach, particularly on the Hill and Old Town area, which encompasses about 12,000 residents. In addition to that, I believe I speak on behalf of thousands of other residents in surrounding coastal communities such as Huntington Beach, Long Beach, and Newport Beach. I first experienced this foul and what I call harmful air event on September 11th of last year. It came on strong. It was intense. I felt some of the symptoms that Renee has described, and that moved me to get involved and do some investigating and advocate for a solution. So I don't know what's been done other than having investigators go out and try to capture air samples to determine where this is coming from. But I suspect that the foul and harmful air events are caused by ocean-going vessels depressurizing and or using bunker fuel at startup. And I'm here to request a call to action, if none has been taken already, proactive measures from you or any other governing board, and that is to determine the source that is causing the foul and harmful air events and whether it is a law-breaking action. Report findings and efforts to reduce the frequency and intensity of the air events that are causing ill effects to Seal Beach residents. I've been a Seal Beach resident for over 16 years. I have experienced subtle odor events, but none like I've been experiencing during the last year. They've been more frequent and they've been more intense. I have some suggestions. I'm not an expert in this area, but based on my research and discussions with other concerned residents, I've come up with the following.
Like Renee did say, I would suggest installing air sampling equipment on and or off the coastline of Old Town Sill Beach and test the air event samples collected. Most of the air events that have happened during the last year occurred during non-standard business hours, and an investigator is not always able to be dispatched. And upon arrival, the transient air odor has, it's gone. Create awareness and warning by partnering with other governing agencies, such as the Air Resource Board or Coast Guard that have jurisdiction with any suspected sources. Perhaps shipping agents may be able to provide records of fuel used and matter released upon request of a governing authority. Establish and utilize a link on the SCAQMD compliance webpage to provide any updates on progress. I'm asking for your help, and I believe I represent thousands of people in the coastal communities of Southern California. Thank you.
Mr. Nastri, can I ask you, I remember specifically when this happened in September, because I have a couple friends who called me and I called the district about it. What transpired?
So there are a number of events that are occurring here all at once, and you can't necessarily attribute one particular event to one particular cause. So district staff has been engaged on this issue for quite some time, and the comments that were made do sort of highlight some of the challenges that we face, particularly the transient nature of odors. So, as has been described, we do send investigators out. If the winds shift, if the winds are light, if they're variable, the inspector may or not be able to verify it. So one of the things that we've done is we've actually reached out to the cities of Huntington Beach, Seal Beach, Long Beach, and with their fire departments. I'll look to my staff to correct, but I know certainly with the fire departments, we're providing them with training so that the fire departments can do the sampling. We would do the analysis. We provide them with the SUMA canisters, and as has been noted, there was one instance recently where we actually identified petroleum compounds. But not only in addition to working with the fire departments of these jurisdictions, we are also reaching out. The question was asked if we have authority over the platforms. We have certain authority over the platform, and we have recently inspected those platforms. Part of what we're doing is also part of an investigation, so there's some information that I would say right now is enforcement related that I can't divulge into, but I will say that just yesterday we spoke with US EPA in an effort to coordinate with Coast Guard and others on enforcement action that would detail where we have specific authority and where the federal authority lies. Part of the challenge, and in that discussion, there was also discussion to reach out to ARB to sort of assist in this effort. So we're already taking those efforts in terms of multi-agency coordination, both at the state and federal level. We're continuing to do the training. We're continuing to have people ready to move out. With regards to the actual placement of additional samplers, that's something that we would consider. We are tapped out on samplers right now. If we were to try to place anything, we would have to pull it from somewhere. And that's...
How much are samplers?
It's not just the sampler cost that's involved, Dr. Burke. It goes into where are you going to site it? How are you going to get the permission to site it? How are you going to provide the power? Do we have the manpower then to do the analysis? Do we have the manpower to do the reporting, the posting on the website? Because all of that's going to come from other efforts that we're looking at, whether it's Hexcro monitoring, whether it's all our other monitoring, whether it's in preparation for AB 617 monitoring. There are a whole lot of factors that go into this. So we're trying to be judicious. One of the things that we talked about, we have utilized floor cameras, forward-looking infrared cameras that would help identify if in fact there are leaks. Right. As you all know, we do have limited authority on ocean-going vessels. And let me restate that. We don't have any authority on ocean-going vessels. But what we can do is if we have the technology that can actually do the detection, and if we can actually find something and document it in a way that is actionable by a federal agency. Unfortunately, a floor camera is not actionable for a federal action. There are other technologies that we're trying to work on that would be certified that would allow us to provide that as information that would be actionable. So we're moving on all of those fronts right now. We're continuing to deploy where we can. I would say that I'm personally going to try to meet with the Coast Guard Commandant and show him some of our information and hope to get greater action on their part. The other part, you know, if we want to start acquiring boats to go out and chase ships, that's something that we could come back as a proposal to the board.
Well,
Can you propose how much money
no,
you'd need?
Excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
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 It's not a conversation.
Sorry.
It would seem to me that if you're engaging the fire department, they'd have a place to spot monitors and provide power that would be readily accessible.
We can certainly ask.
Because, you know, I know that we can't solve every problem in the world. And smell problems are terrible. They're hard to catch and all that. But if I woke up in the middle of the night and was inundated by an odor which gave me a migraine headache or made me throw up or do something like that, or if my granddaughter was staying at my house and, you know, would cause her some kind of discomfort, I would certainly not want to go to an agency and hear them say, well, you know, I'm tapped out of monitors. That's not what anybody wants to hear. Now, there's some things we can't, I understand that, but we can find some monitors. Let me tell you this, I would use all the little influence I have with this board to find a few dollars to find some monitors and find some money for some manpower to run this down. Now, here's what's not clear to me. I remember the incidents in September, and it was massive. It was really something, because I'm telling you, I heard from people that I hadn't heard from in probably 20 years, okay? Have there been any other incidents, or was that the incident?
So the big one that you're referring to was September 11th
Right.
of last year. And we did have a few this year, but the big ones were the last
So
week
you've
of
had
July,
additional
which is the
incidents,
map
but
that
they were
that
not
I
as
showed.
significant as.
Correct. And so I had asked the city of Seal Beach to private message me when they were affected and how they were affected. And the other 5 pages I did not give you in that booklet are actually all the last names of the residents and the street that they live on. And they all, like I said, I have all my own data of how that these residents were affected. And like I said, it's getting worse, and somebody has to know something. We just need to find out who those people are.
Well, look, you know, I've been here 25 years. The 25 years I've been here, this agency has always been overworked and undermanned, and never enough money. I don't care who you are, it's never enough money. But we really suffer from that. But we have such an important mission to perform that I leave here many a day with a headache, because I know that I ask him to do things that he's going to go home and scream at his wife because I asked him to do the impossible, you know? And then I jump on him when he doesn't do it right away. So I think that this is an important issue, no question. And we were just talking about, if you were here earlier, we were just talking about bringing a smell rule back in November and maybe or December. There are those who believe the smells are not our business. There are those, okay? Those are people who live in nice neighborhoods. Those are people who don't deal with smells. Trust me. So I'm a sympathetic here, and I can't speak for my other colleagues, but, you know, I think you deserve help. And Wayne, look, Wayne has been doing, since he got this job, I feel sorry for him sometimes, but he really has been doing a good job. He really has. And everybody I run into tells me that he tries. So I know he's going to try and help you. Okay? So after this meeting is concluded, why don't you get together and sit down, maybe chat with Wayne for a few minutes about the inspector that's been assigned to your case, and talk to him and see if there's not some common sense thing that you can't figure out to try and get this thing handled, okay?
Sure, because the cities need your guidance. The cities do not know what to do. They're at a loss.
Hey, I know exactly what you're talking about. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
coming today in public. That concludes our
There's some
public.
more- there's-
Oh, we got Dr. Liu and we have Ms. Mitchell.
Just had a question for staff, whether wind speed and direction meteorological data might help if we collected that, or asked the neighbors to collect it.
Yes.
So we
in fact,
should.
Dr. Liu, that is probably the more important information to get, so.
Oh,
and
I
it's
just put
probably
my finger
more-
on it, didn't I? Okay.
And it's more likely to be helpful rather than putting more sampling equipment out there.
And we can, for a couple $100, you can get a pretty decent, pretty accurate wind speed and direction. I've talked to you actually about those things in the past. So we should encourage the community members to do it. We should do it ourselves. We should find money to do it. Other agencies have supplemental environmental project money right now that's available for things like this, for community monitoring. I'll talk to you about the details, but maybe if we don't have the funding to do it, maybe we can get it from other agencies.
We love other people's money. That's great.
Dr. Liu, just so you know, one of the issues that we have been looking into, just to confirm what Matt was saying, is plotting the meteorological data. There's other things that we've been looking into as well. Some of the samples that have been taken, approximately 5 of them showed petroleum-based sources. One of them showed a biological source, meaning wetlands, something like that. And so we're looking into a variety of different issues.
Ms. Mitchell?
Thank you, Chairman. I was intrigued by the comment that the gentleman made about vessels switching over to bunker fuel. And there is the rule in the ports that they have to use low sulfur fuel for the first 40 miles outside the port. But somebody could be violating that rule. And I don't know, but there's my suggestion is to be working with the ports of LA and Long Beach to see whether they can offer anything in the way of advice on this. Also, there are those wetlands in Huntington Beach that used to be oil fields along there, and that would seem to be maybe a source of some of these issues. So that's something I think to look into as well.
So the sulfur content sort of refers to the sweetness of the product. The United States has been designated as an emission control area, so they can't use the bunker fuel, I want to say within 100 miles. Is that right, Barbara? Or 200? 200.
Oh, it's 200.
So 200 nautical miles, they're not going to be able to use the old bunker fuel. So that's really not a concern, is the bunker fuel issue. The other issues, as Bay was alluding to, you know, we do have wetlands, we do have sulfur, hydrogen sulfides being released from the wetlands at times. We have the old oil field production, particularly along like Huntington Cliffs, the wetlands along Bolsa Chica. So as Matt was saying, the wind speed and sort of the MET data is really important because sometimes the winds are low speed, they're variable, they're shifting, and it could be coming from the wetlands. There's a lot of factors that go into it, but we're looking into all of those issues. But as far as the bunker fuel, that's not really an issue at this point.
Thank you.
Mayor Caccione.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just following up on the comments and Joe looking for some money, I noticed on item 10 on our agenda today, we transferred a lot of money from many obsolete accounts. And those accounts were for a purpose back in the 90s or something like that. So I say we open that other account with that it's got 1.6 million or whatever we transferred over, just different accounts. I read through it all. Take some of that and put it in an account for this specific project because there's money there. We close out those obsolete accounts and staff is looking at more. I know Mike's looking at that, so, Wayne's got his army, and his army can only fight so many battles. Otherwise, I got to bring up one historical story, Mr. Chair. Nothing like your stories, but it's a small story. So, when I look at resources, I'm a coach, and I'm coaching right now again, and I've got talent, I don't have talent. So back in the couple hundred years before Christ, there was a powerful Greek army. And this Greek army was going through Europe, and they got into Italy when Rome started becoming a power. But before, Greek was and there was this great general called General Epicurus. And he was battling, going through Italy and just demolishing the Roman army. But towards the end of this, he was a great leader. But toward the end of his battles, he found out there's no army left. He went on these battles, and his name was General Epicurus. Have you heard of the term Pyrrhic victory? Mm-hmm. And what happened was at the end, he went back in disgrace because his army had been depleted. The Rome became the empire then. But with our staff, Wayne can only do so much, and then you just burn people out. And I want his staff to be that army that got burned out. That was all, but it's right. With all of our, whether you're working for the Attorney General, AQMD, our cities, your companies, we have only so much we can do, and maybe that other resource, these other funds can be used.
Right. I made that very same suggestion yesterday myself.
Really?
So great minds think along, but I didn't have the Pyrrhic story. You notice I wrote that down. I'll be using that later.
I thought he was going to say he ran into the Cacciatis and that was it. Boom.
The items on the agenda, we have closed session.
Dr. Burke. It is necessary for the board to recess the closed session pursuant to Government Code Sections 94956.9A and 95956.9D1 to confer with its counsel regarding pending litigation which has been initiated formally into which the SCAQMD is a party. The actions are Beck versus SCAQMD, WCAB case numbers ADJ 1914537 and ADJ 9748689. SCAQMD versus EPA, U.S. Court of Appeals, D.C. Circuit case number 15-1115, consolidated with 15-1123, Sierra Club et al. Versus EPA. It is also necessary for the board to recess pursuant to closed session, pursuant to Government Code Section 94956.9A and 54956.9D4 to consider initiation of litigation one case. It's also necessary to recess closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6 to confer regarding upcoming labor negotiations with designated representatives regarding represented employee salaries and benefits or other mandatory subjects within the scope of representation. Negotiator A. John Alvera, represented employees, Teamsters, Local 911, and SCAQMD Professional Employees Association, and to confer with labor negotiators regarding unrepresented employees, agency designated representative A. John Alvera, unrepresented employees, designated deputies in management, and confidential employees. Oh, sorry. Yeah, got it. A report of the reportable actions taken in closed session will be filed with the clerk of the board. The meeting is adjourned.